check in a money market mutual fund. Then we'll reinvest the earnings into foreign currency accounts with compounding interest, and it's gone.
What?
It's gone. It's all gone.
What's all gone?
The money in your account. It didn't do too well. It's gone.
What do you mean? I have $100.
Not anymore, you don't. Poof.
Yo!
Hello. I actually have a couple other clips I'm going to play real quick. I just didn't.
Oh, man.
Well, we're going to win and we're going to help. We have plans to build a railroad from the Pacific all the way across the Indian Ocean. We have plans to build in Angola, one of the largest solar plants in the world. I can go on, but I'm not. I'm going off script. I'm going to get in trouble. Well, we're going to win and we're going to help. We have plans to build a railroad from the Pacific all the way across the Indian Ocean.
Oh, my God!
Let him cook! I said let him cook!
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Outlawed Thoughts, episode 63. Back with the usual host, Kareem. How have you been?
Good.
I can hear you. All right, so that's working. Hey, JC, let me know how my audio is, because last show it was messed up. I'm hoping
Thanks,
this show is
Jesus.
fixed. So, yeah, I'm gonna cover some random stuff this episode, but I got some stories I pulled up, and then we'll just let everything else.
Porkfest is going on, so I couldn't be there. Good luck to everybody at Porkfest.
Audio seems fine. Okay, perfect. You have a new background. That's
I
not
do.
your usual. That looks more comfortable.
It is. I was out here doing some work. Sometimes I come out to the patio. It's nice and chill. I sleep out here. You know, it's not too hot. And I got my green screen behind me where I do my crypto videos. I hit my 100,000.
Yeah, I saw that on Facebook. You hit 100K on that. Congrats. That's cool. I get notifications for that channel all the time.
Layton's got a MetaMask wallet with a bunch of Shiba Inu and Pepe tokens. Let's go. We got a plan to build a pipeline all the way from Angola.
Oh, God. That clip was fucking great. That's Memology, which is a great YouTuber to subscribe to. He just posts like news clips and memes and stuff.
Yeah.
It's funny.
So if you have an alcoholic beverage or any type of beverage, I like to have a moment of silence for
Teddy K kicked it. Yeah.
Yeah, for good old Uncle Ted, all the predictions he made. And that's the one thing where I really disagree with ANCAPs, actually, because they're like, well, you know, I'm like, look, listen, for one, he was MK Ultra. Two, people like, yeah, you have a Fiverr and you have a crypto channel. I get this, but like, take into account everything else. Fine. And I'm a data analyst. Everything else, I'm for natural stuff. I don't take medicine. I wear shunganite and stuff like that. Like I am for, you know, natural cures for everything. I'm for natural.
I would say that
I want people to be more in touch with nature. I agree with the Liver King aspect, not what he did, personally with his, but I agree with wanting to be with nature, and I also agree with coalitioning with anarcho-primitivists. I don't think it's a terrible idea. I think it's a very niche thing for niche people. But they're still anarchists, and to me, that puts them ahead of conservatives and liberals. That's my.
I will say that I'm not as big of a fan of the Industrial Revolution and its consequences. I've read enough of his stuff at this point. Most of the, I think he misses a lot of stuff that he doesn't really weigh properly. But at the same time, I think, you know, guy kicked the bucket, so there's that. But, I mean, you know, there is something to be said about the whole violence aspect of it, which I did see people going back and forth, because His death, of course, kicked up the Twitter storm of people debating back and forth how
Yeah,
everybody should
there
feel
were
about
people
him.
like Rip King, here's my thing. I don't agree with that aspect, but what I do agree with is people get mad is that I do see relative consequences to benefits. So there are people, older people, and people who are not tech savvy. They want to work at a fast food restaurant or anywhere. And they walk in, they'll tell them to apply online. For me, why don't just throw a piece of paper and write down stuff
Right, I
and
get
just
that sentiment. The problem is that a lot of that has to do with the choices people make of geographically where they decide to live and how they live. I live in Alaska. We don't really, if you want a job in my town, you go get a paper application, you fill it out. I mean, you can put an application in online, but every job I've gotten here has been done with
okay. Well,
a
that's
paper
good.
application.
See, I looked at his arguments, and I want to make a fundamental distinction. And then we'll move on. I know this because Teddy K said the Industrial Revolution was a problem. John Zerzan, who I've had on, who did not, to my knowledge, do anything violent, but it is still within his means, said the agricultural revolution went too far, which you can
Well,
take.
I'd agree with that. There's parts of the agricultural revolution that do things that are definitely bad for humans.
Yes,
And I think there's things that the rest of those sort of evolutions of science and things have done to harm humans, but they've also done a lot of good.
they
I
have.
view I
So I think
view
it's all I'm asking people to do. All I'm asking people to do who watch this, who are voluntarists or left libertarians or syndicalists or ANCOMs or decentralized community people, is fine. I'm not condoning using violence. I'm not condoning the way his manifesto was particularly written. I am saying to take a look at fundamental problems that have come from things like microplastics, EMF, using yes, we can feed more people, but the food's of a lower quality. That shows to me very clear in the Hadza. And I always joke with Danny about that, and he's gonna yell at me if he sees this. But take in stride that the aspects of hunter gatherer society that were good and were bad, and try and see how we can work with people like that and people with understanding like that who are anarchists to further society. And let's understand that maybe there's a trade-off and it's not completely one-sided. And I have
the
that's the way I
scanning
look at it.
the scanning for menu things. Corn in the chat brings up here is something that I've definitely noticed here because we're a tourist area. But I will defend the scannable apps to an extent simply because I will tell you, as somebody who works in like a hotel around restaurants, things like that, and has worked in restaurants in the past, it moves people along a lot faster. It's a lot easier to have a QR code in the center of each table. That way, you don't have to pass out menus. You don't have to have this physical thing that each server has to account for. At the same time, you're finding the reason restaurants are moving towards that system, frankly, is because the old people in which Kareem is referencing, people who want to live in the analog sort of way, are dying off, and the majority of people who go into restaurants who are going out to eat socially are not those people anymore. And so those restaurants are going to cater more and more to the people who want convenience, want things faster, who don't care about slow, good quality, will trade off for fast, less than great
Okay.
quality.
All
So
right.
I
Let's hit
view
a
it as
story
sort of
though.
a trade off. Let me put it this way: if Ted Kaczynski or Surzan want to live that lifestyle, they can. They can live in Alaska. There's a bunch of different villages and areas you can live up here where you can live as primitive as you want. You'll live hundreds of miles from where there's another city, from where there's another group of people who are living. You'll live hundreds of miles from a radio tower if you want. These people don't do that. They choose to live in homestead environments and areas that aren't really off the grid, that aren't really rural, that aren't really those things. and then they put on a facade as though they do. The reality is, Ted Kaczynski went into a cabin in the woods and started constructing all these things and writing his manifesto and doing this shit. He could have just as well bought a fucking $20,000-$30,000 cabin at the time in the state of Alaska and lived for the rest of his life writing and being an educational person, teaching individuals. Hell, at the time, there was such a lack of schooling in the state, he could have been a professor within a year or two. He chose to take an expedient, quicker route using the very things that he hated to blow people up. Because regardless of whether he claims naturalized or whatever those bombs were, they weren't. And so he sort of betrayed his own foundation in doing what he did. So I think there's a lot of stuff that people miss and that he missed in his own ideology when he was writing some of that stuff because he was blinded by his own hatred. He wasn't paying attention to what the reality was. He had already decided what his reality was. And that's how that manifesto is written. It's written from a perspective of somebody who already has decided that he's correct, rather than somebody
Yeah.
who's attempting to find out whether he's correct. And that is the problem.
Yeah, I don't like the way it reads. I don't like the way it reads. I'll give you that. I just wanted to briefly bring that up.
But yeah, at the same time, I recognize that he was a great writer. Some of the things he put out there are great ideas.
We're good, yeah. And he had
the
very good
primitism
critique.
side of it, I think, is definitely useful. I just, from a modern perspective, I look at a lot of those movements, same way I do at a lot of the naturalists, which you brought up before. That sort of hippie era.
I look at it like
medicine.
this. I'm an ANCAP. I'm going to use technology, but I'll coalition with these people. I want to learn from them. And the Hadza, technically the Amish, are anarchist societies that are primitive, and I'd like to learn more about them.
Right, okay, but like there's an example of it, is the Amish. That's example I see a lot of people laud as being these upstanding individuals. The reality is the most of the Amish communities these days do not live homogeneously in their own Amish communities. They have kowtowed to the fact that they allow a bit of modern architecture, modern contextualism, modern culture, many of these different aspects that they previously pushed out. The reason that happened is because, much like those naturalists that I was speaking about a second ago, they didn't move with the geographic makeup of where people who wanted to live that way went. They tried to stay in states and stay in areas that were becoming more modern, and so that's ultimately led to, in my opinion, their downfall. But the Amish are basically giant furniture factories now. I mean, that's what they are. If you go to any small town, you'll find furniture warehouses. That's what the Amish do to make money now. It's that and farming architectural work. It's a business.
I'm not saying the Amish are actually completely primitive. I'm just saying they're more on that side. They still use cell phones, I've seen in some things. So it's interesting. You wanted to talk about aliens and UFOs and the truth
I
is
got
there.
some UFO
And maybe you're
stories.
interested in somebody apparently was not there, but they said he made a racist comment in his Alexa, I think, turn. Like
I saw that story. Yeah, that's a whole bunch of hokey pokey stuff. I mean, don't build your home out of a bunch of digital stuff. Everybody was feeling sorry for that guy. I'll explain the story. I'll do this real quick.
All right.
Basically, it was a guy. He had his home rigged up with the Amazon Alexa smart home system. He had like all the speakers and dongles for his TVs, for his thermostat, for his AC unit, his refrigerators, everything. This dude was wired up. There was a whole list of it in the news story. Apparently, Amazon, he wakes up one day, Amazon has flagged his account and everything just doesn't work in his house. No heat, no anything like that, obviously. Contacts Amazon, turns out they had flagged his account for so-called hate speech, claiming, I think he had said the N-word or something equating to that in his house or something, but they pulled the account and then they reinstated it. I believe it was the next day or that same day, I can't remember, but they reinstated his account and said it was a mistake. But what it does sort of prove is something I think a lot of people have said would happen, which is if you're building these digital homes like this, especially with one company, a la Amazon, then you sort of are allowing them to just flip the switch at any point in time. The obvious fix to this uh, isn't necessarily not to have digital homes or not to have access to digital stuff like that in the home. Some of it's actually pretty useful. The real fix, I think, for this is that you really desperately need competition in these areas in the market, because we need to have sort of a competitor to Alexa, competitor to these devices that are offering a more freer option. And
I
you
think
need
we need
really
ANCAP
multiple.
AI.
Well, yeah, actually, I mean, I
Because I
think
know an
that
ANCAP AI
already
is a
exists
Loki
though.
thing.
There's
Yeah, it does.
there's a couple different libertarian AI programs, although I haven't seen any that I like.
I
I
have one
haven't.
more like.
Which one?
It's a Floki GPT one. I'll show you.
Okay,
I
I'll have
think
to
you'll
check
like it.
that out.
I'll tag you and Jack in it.
But I've messed around with a few that I found that some Spanish like dev techs had made and some stuff like that, but nothing I found I really liked. That really, because what I really want to find is a uh, speech AI that can do political content properly, which a lot of the stuff that I found through ChatGPT obviously gets tripped up by censors. It also seems to have a problem with pulling certain data from things like Wikipedia. If you ask ChatGPT to cite things, and the thing you ask it to cite is obscure enough, it just will not cite reality. It'll just go into some weird world where it pulls some random words. So I'm hoping to find something that is more focused on one topic, rather than sort of the base stuff. But yeah, UFO stuff.
Yeah,
We had the whistleblower dude come back around. I
I'm
saw
about.
this story, and I figured we'd talk a bit about this. So
Yeah,
this is from
sure.
the
I'm about to win
intelligence.
bingo. I
This
have a
is from.
bingo card. Okay, I've got all the conspiracies. All I need is project. There's a funny thing. It has the stick meme. The dude with the stick, like, come on. I'm sure you've seen that.
Yeah.
And it says, come on, do Project Bluebeam so I can win conspiracy bingo. And from what I've heard, this is the last thing they're going to try and do, which is
So I'll
the
debate you a bit on this, but
fake alien
we'll get
invasion.
into this. Last week, UFO hopefuls and terrestrial-minded skeptics were captivated by the account of David Grouch, a former Pentagon official who claims the United States has been hiding evidence of alien technology and the bodies of crashed alien pilots from Congress. It was a huge allegation taken seriously by some only because of Grouch's experience as an intelligence officer working on the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, its Department of Defense UFO research wing. In a Sunday interview with News Nation, Grouch expanded on some of his bold claims and added a few new ones, although he did not provide any evidence beyond his word. Below are the most eye-opening allegations from his 40-minute segment. The UFO could be from another dimension. Grouch received a college scholarship from the Air Force to study physics, did not describe the unusual aircraft as technology from another planet. I don't want to necessarily denote origin, he said. I don't think we have all the data to say. Oh, they're coming from a certain location, Gross proposed. The vehicles the Pentagon is hiding could have come from a different physical dimension, as described in quantum mechanics, saying we know there are extra dimensions due to high energy particle collisions, etc., and there's a theoretical framework to explain that. It could be that this is not necessarily extraterrestrial, and actually that it's coming from a higher dimensional physical space that might be co-located right here, he said. In the interview, Grosjean reiterated that he has not personally seen the evidence of non-human technology, but that intelligence officials he spoke with as part of his role as the UFO task force have told him it's extensive. The Vatican was in on a UFO cover-up. Grouch claimed the first UFO case he was briefed on involved a vehicle downed in Italy in 1933. The Mussolini government had allegedly kept it in storage until near the World War II. Pope Pius, I'm not sure, no Roman numerals. I think that's the seventh. Pope Pius VII back-channeled the existence of the object to the United States, which obtained it in 1944 and 1945. Um, so I think we can kind of pause on this story here and
All
just
right.
chat about this in general. So first off, I want to talk about that whole Mussolini thing because I have a whole idea about that, which is that might be the Die Lok, which is the German World War II bell that a lot of people reference, the UFO bell with all the Skrillex writing on the bottom of it. Because I believe that story goes the way that the Germans came across Die Lok was that they got that from the Italian government. And the years would work out that might possibly be that craft. Um, I've heard a lot of people have a lot of opinions on this whole whistleblower himself, and so I want to take a second to give my opinion on that. You can sort of weigh in, and then we'll talk about the
Yeah,
whole thing as a
definitely.
whole. Um, Here's the thing. I reference this as sort of the Jesus issue, right? Like, what if Jesus actually did come back? Like, how many people would believe that it was Jesus? How many people would take him seriously? Most of the people would just point
Wait,
and laugh.
I would. You know why? Because he did.
Okay, well, let's.
Wait. The Futurama episode. I'm
Oh,
Santa.
okay.
No, I'm Santa, and I'm his friend Jesus. Get him, Jesus. I help those who help themselves.
Right.
Do you know what I'm referencing?
Yes, I do. But regardless, I view it as sort of this similar situation. This guy was not on some super credible news network. He wasn't on Fox. He wasn't on CNN. What I mean by credible is what the
Credible.
public views as credible. So
It
what
is.
what your soccer mom sitting at home who's sitting on the television, or your random 40-year-old guy who's a blue collar dude, those are the people who make up the majority of populace. So they're going home, they're flipping on their TV. What they saw were news people reacting to this guy's interview. Nobody actually got to see the real interview because nobody bothered to go watch it on News Nation because nobody knows what the fuck that network is. Nobody had heard of that network before this guy went on it, for the most part. So this guy does this whistleblower account, and the guy who interviews him is pretty well known if you're into UFO stuff. He's somebody who's actually done a lot of work trying to track a lot of this stuff down. So it made sense that that's who was talking to the dude. It seemed to make sense to me anyway. The girl that's working with the whistleblower is a girl who's worked with a lot of other UFO people. I'm sure she's connected in some way to the government, but she does good work, and she's gotten these people in front of the media, which is ultimately what her job is. So I view this as sort of a similar situation where everybody's coming out now and going, well, this is a psyop. This is all connected to Project Bluebeam. I don't think most people who talk about Project Bluebeam knows where any of that came from, because if they did, they wouldn't be talking about it. It's a bullshit story that comes from a book that was written by a guy with a bunch of papers that never were confirmed to be real or not. It's a bullshit conspiracy that was born out of one dude who wanted to get rich, and so you see these things sort of propagate on the internet and spread really far. I've seen this in the past with other conspiracy theories. There people go, well, there's all this evidence that this guy published in this book. You had to buy it. It's 1999, and there's this. It's like, no, those aren't conspiracy theories. That's horseshit that people have cooked up. And now that we're in a digital age, that same horseshit that was sold for 1999 in a book in 1999 is now being used in 2023 on the internet to be brought up again as some new theory, new thing. The government's been involved with the alien stuff for a very long time. If you want proof of that, you can look at in the 90s and the 80s some of the people who came out and in these alien meetup events that were going on, right? These big events where they'd have tens of thousands of people showing up to talk about UFO stuff. Many of those speakers and people who were giving out so-called documents to those people turned out to be feds, and the government admitted to that. There are public documents that prove those things. But when I look at the vast majority of this, when you take this whistleblower in his hole, it's like he's not actually saying anything that's that insane. Everything that he's saying is stuff that UFO researchers, people who have been talking about ufologies, things like that, have been saying for 40 years at this point. So everybody coming out and saying, "Oh, this is all a psyop," and this guy is saying this stuff because the government's doing it. It's like, first off, no, I don't think the government's has a fourth layer of gravity they can manipulate. I don't think they understand magnetism to the point that they can literally shoot one craft to this another side of a paradigm in a matter of seconds.
Yes, they do.
I don't. Uh, and I think that's evident in the warfare that we do.
You don't know that.
I don't know. It's a lot of the bullshit I see with the whole rods of gods horse shit and this concept that the government's going to set up these satellite blankets and stuff. It's.
Have you ever looked into the gateway process?
You talking about Project Stargate stuff, or are you
No.
talking about
No,
gateway
no.
as in like astral projection? You talking?
Yeah,
like,
kind of. OBE's astral projection.
Yeah, the government, the CIA, and the military spent millions upon millions upon millions of dollars researching that. A Men Who Scare Goats is a great movie about that stuff. That goes across some of the history of it.
Yeah, I'm studying the gateway process.
I've met one of the guys who is in that movie, the Men Who Stare at Goats. Not the actor, but the actual dude. He used to live up in Anchorage, Alaska. That was where he lived after he left the military. And a lot of those guys went to J Bear, which was the base up in Anchorage. But the reality is, like, even that, like, do I believe those guys did that? Absolutely. I believe to an extent in some kind of ESP, some kind of thing. If the government's going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars researching that shit, it's either that it was all black site money, which I don't buy because there was too much shit being done for it to not have been being spent somewhere. Or they were actually trying to prove that this stuff was real, which I think is probably closer to the truth. And I think in a way they probably did prove that a lot of it is real. The guys that claim they could astrally see the surface of Mars and things like that. But I don't necessarily know how much of it is actually real and how much of it is just guys who were getting paychecks. And as long as they could keep putting on magic shows, they kept getting paychecks. I also grew up with family who were magicians. So I know you can really fuck with people if you know how to do something that they can't explain. Whether that be telling them what's behind a box that you could never know the contents of, or whether that's telling them and describing to them a location that you've never actually seen. There are people that can do some weird shit.
Yeah, well, essentially, it's not even just weird shit. It's understanding the fundamental constructs of reality from an analytical perspective, which I used to teach.
Do you think ESP is inherently satanic? Like God
It
didn't
isn't.
want humans to mess with that stuff? I would say no, mainly because I don't view God as being that kind of figure. Like
It's a
personally,
non-selective force based on your
I'm not
subconscious.
a Christian. Like the Christian denomination points to God as being some kind of ultimate purveyor. I don't view it that way. I think God might have been a creator, but I don't think he necessarily lords over everything you do. I think you have free will to an extent.
Yes. Well, satanic is, well, most people don't know what those two things are. ESP is extrasensory perception, which David Sinclair.
See,
No,
I
it's
have to talk about this because paganism's like my thing that I actually like.
Okay, do it.
So I would say
Thank you.
paganism, in the way that you're explaining it, JC, the connection to that. Spells and mysticism and paganism is not seen as some magical woo-woo thing. And this is why they believed in it, is because it's more grounded than that. It's based in naturalism, it's based in the things that they worshipped that were all based in the things they used. So, worship of war and worship of fighting was because that's what they did to get their glory. The same thing goes for the worship of land, because that's what you fed off of and made sure you had life off of. So a lot of those spells and things go back to that. It's a lot less mental, like everybody today likes to make it seem. Everybody wants to paint all the Vikings as mushroom-eating shamans, but it's a little simpler than that. Most of them were really just religious folk, the same as anybody else. They just viewed it differently. So that would be the way I'd sort of put that forward. But no, I don't view ESP really as having a connection to uh, God per se. This is where my thing of like humanism would come into play, where I go, I think this probably goes back further than necessarily God, and probably has to do with the actual um, brain and where your soul or whatever you refer to it comes from. I think a lot of pagan magic is psychological stuff like fulfilling prophecy. Yeah, so that's true, like the fulfillment of
Maybe.
past lives, the fulfillment of that stuff. But I would hesitate to put that in the same box as that other stuff. Sort of different to me. ESP seems
What does ESP stand for? What is it?
um
Because I can explain all this stuff if you'd like.
ESP is psychic
Extra sensory
frequency.
perception. That's it.
Okay, okay,
So
okay.
David Sinclair has a really good book about this. He studied a lot of very interesting things. He has the most horrific book. I couldn't get through it. How about that? So he's a very amazing
I'm
author.
gonna pop off for 2 seconds. Go ahead and run through some of this stuff with chat and
Okay.
stuff, and do your thing.
David Sinclair is a guy I definitely look into. He studied the supernatural a lot. He has very, very interesting books on exorcism, on voodoo, on different things like that. So ESP is essentially a practice of things that are just as simple as going back in your subconscious mind and pulling out, just remembering things. It can go from everything to literally just, having the extra sense of like, oh, I can, pull something from my memory, to going all the way to, being able to remote view to protect yourself from nasty attacks, from being able to do different things spiritually, being able to, astral project, OBEs, things like that. And he does have a quick thing on Ouija boards, which I don't agree with or partake in. To me, satanic stuff is really about the ego and the self and just fulfilling the ego. So, no, I don't think one is a practice, one is a state of consciousness. So, they're different things. Is there intertwining stuff? Can someone who's a Satanist study ESP? Yes. But that doesn't make it inherently satanic. And it's not satanic because ESP is actually going beyond the ego mind and really understanding there's a super conscious above the subconscious that can delineate information. And that's getting away from like, oh, I'm just me, or I'm just, this physical body. So that's my interpretation from studying David Sinclair, who amazing author. Amazing author. Absolutely out of this world. And Leighton will be back in a bit. Leighton will be back. We got JC watching the chat with my phone. Waiting on Leighton to come back. Just chill. We have intermission.
What'd you do? Leave?
No, I'm here.
You fucker. Have you been quiet this whole time? I'm gonna have to cut so much out of this.
Not a little bit for. I ran out of stuff to say. I'm like, I don't know what to say next. Sometimes that's why I can't. People like podcast by yourself because sometimes I'm like, I don't know what to talk about. What are you guys up to?
It's no big deal. All right. We'll jump back into it, guys. I'm sorry. I had to go deal with some family stuff, so. All right. So yeah, we'll bring up some more clips here. This is question remains about unidentified objects. So I want to bring up some stuff. So with this whole alien thing, we have, oh god, why is this being talked about? Were you guys talking about Jeremiah stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean,
Jeremiah
I do shows with him. He's a cool dude. He's battling evil.
Sure. um,
You got to do the anarcho coalition, man.
we're not gonna go there. We'll be here for an hour.
I mean, all you got to do is pop some Bakunin and chill with the homies. Be like, hey, how's your decentralized commune going? It's going swell.
So I wanted to reference back with the whole UFO stuff to this story because I think this got buried in the whole shit show that was happening with people talking about UFOs being shot down a little while ago with these whole blimps and things that were being shot out of the air, and everybody sort of went on and on and on and on and on about how this was a psyop and all these things were fake. And out of all the things that were shot down, one of them was a little peculiar, which is the one that was shot down over Alaska, which didn't make a lot of sense because you had this one that was shot kind of in between Alaska and Canada. And this one, of course, you had photos of it being collected. You had another that was shot down in Alaska that nobody got to get a sight of. In other words, you didn't get to see a video of it, no photos of it, nothing. And then, when eventually that thing was shot down, the government came out and said, actually, the footage of us shooting it down is classified and isn't going to be released. So this sort of follows this sort of trail of events. We have this same story here. This is from last year, before all of this stuff had ramped back up, worm-shaped cloud over Alaska mountain prompts police investigation amid fears it could be UFO or plane crash. And I think a lot of people recognize these photos. These were quoted to be, after a while, of course, what did they say this was? This was trailings from a jet. That was the claim, that this is basically produced by a plane. Never seen a plane do that, and I've lived in this state my entire life, and I've lived with a lot of other people who've lived in the state. And by the way, spent a lot of time around military bases with planes flying. Never saw that. So, this is some weird shit that seems to happen around this state, I think, in general with the UFO stuff, and I just don't ever see really people talk about it seriously. People who are anti-government have a tendency to just go, well, this is all a psyop, or the government's creating all of it, and it's like, listen, the government wasn't creating these stories in the 1700s and 1800s, which is how far a lot of these alien stories go back. We have UFO sightings from witness accounts in the time of the Revolutionary War. So placing this solely on the hands of the government is sort of stupid to me. But it's sort of a time will tell sort of thing, I suppose. I found a book I didn't know I had. I was going through all my books yesterday. I got Tom Wood stuff and stuff I got from Mises University, but check this out. This is called The Great Movies, and this is cool. This is from by Roger Ebert, the movie reviewer, and if you look here, that's his signature.
Nice.
Which this is like one of my cool books that I have in the collection. I'm not even a huge Roger Ebert fan, but my grandmother got the chance to get this copy, and so I picked it up, and it has some great stuff in it. Some awesome stuff. It has like stuff on just old movies that were good, and movies he thought were decent. It's like a 2-part series or something like that. And I never got the second one, but I got the first one, and it happens to be a signed copy, which I think there were like 250 of. So it's neat. I'll just hold on to it eventually until I can trade it or sell it for a better book. I thought about buying a copy of Ego and Hubris, the Michael Malice comic, because those are getting cheaper, and there's sort of a monopoly that could be founded there if somebody wanted to.
Are you a fan of Michael Malice?
Yeah, he's alright. I like a lot of the... He is very good at explaining anarchist positions. And so I have his book, the Anarchist Handbook. I read that. And I've went over a lot of his stuff as far as like the North Korea stuff and things like that. It's good. It's decent. But I don't know if it's my favorite. He's my favorite as far as coverage of anarchism, but I think he's probably the best right now.
I think Dr. Leeson is the best.
I'm not familiar. Actually, that name does not sound familiar to me, but that might be just be.
Kind of like how you're studying Joe Vogler. I look a lot at Somalia and try and draw parallels.
Okay, well, that's a ways off. I was seeing if there were any stuff in here he was mentioning, but no, I don't see it. But yeah, this is like, so to give you an idea, some of the movies he puts in the list here, because I saw JC asking about it.
Mm-hmm.
We've got 2001: A Space Odyssey, The 400 Blows, 8.5, The Wrath of God, Ali, Fury Eats the Soul, All About Eve, The Apartment, Apocalypse Now, The Apu Trilogy, Battleship Potemkin, Beauty and the Beast, Bella de Jour, The Bicycle Thieves, The Big Sleep, Blow Up, Body Heat, Bonnie and Clyde, Bride of Frankenstein, Broken Blossoms, Casablanca, Chinatown, Citizen Kane, City Lights, Days of Heaven, The Dialogue, Detour, Do the Right Thing. So it's just a bunch of movies that he goes back through and sort of shares quips about and stuff. But it's a good book, and I'm reading through it for the first time because I had never bothered to read any of it. I just sort of got it because it was signed.
Cool.
But as far as last stories, I don't really, other than the UFO stuff, I didn't have a bunch for a show today, and it was sort of scrambled. But I guess there was this. There was a whole mass shooting at a Juneteenth party.
Oh, God.
Which, that
I was going to talk about Bobby Kennedy and the CIA, what he said on Rogan. Does that merit a story?
Bobby Kennedy with the whole assassination part, or just the podcast in general?
Well, just he went on Joe Rogan and said the CIA might be coming after him, and Tim Pool was talking about it.
Yeah, I'm about an hour and a half through the Rogan appearance. It's a pretty good show. They're talking a lot about the medical stuff. It's mainly been a discussion about, at least so far, mainly been a discussion about the book, The Real Anthony Fauci, and less of a discussion about Kennedy himself. But it's been a decent episode so far. I've got to finish the rest of it tonight, so I'll get through that. But, you know, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of RFK's inner politics, but
I am.
I want him to take as big of a bite out of Biden's base as possible. So I think he's
I hear he's
doing a pretty
polling.
good job.
I hear he's polling really good, sometimes even better than Biden and Trump. So we'll see what happens.
The reality is, I don't think RFK could win, but he could win the nomination if he did the right things. I don't think, you know, I think some people are correct when they say that's crazy, but I think it's possible he could get the nomination over Biden if he played the cards right. Seems like RFK changes his message depending on who he's talking to. I don't expect much from him. Yeah, and that's sort of been where I'm at with the way I've seen him sort of communicate. I saw him on Dave Smith, and I saw an interview with him literally 3 days after that where he backtracks on a lot of the things that he says even in those interviews. And I think it's something that a lot of people have to sort of watch out for with political candidates like that. You know, especially at Kennedy, they certainly know how to walk the walk. So there's something to be said about that.
Okay.
But yeah, I think right now, obviously, you've got DeSantis, and you've got Trump, and you've got RFK, and you've got Biden. Basically, that makes up the political 2024 field. The Libertarian Party looks like it's nominating a cop and a queer. So we'll see how that goes. Take that with whatever you will. I'm not going to be voting for either of those candidates. I just, and what I mean by that is I think that I principally will not vote for a cop. And from my perspective, I view the other candidates as being soft. They're people who can't stand up to what they're facing and do the things that are going to need to be done. I haven't seen anybody I'm really confident in, so that's been sort of disappointing. So with this whole 2024 thing, which I think I'm probably going to cover quite a bit on the channel with shorter videos rather than live streams, so that I don't have to cover the political side of 2024.
Well, John McAfee's not dead and he jumps in and wins it.
Yeah, that'd be... Whew. Yeah, John McAfee coming back from the grave to win the LP nomination. Sure. I'd take that over what we've got right now at this point. But yeah, it's just not great. There just isn't anybody I'm like, hey, you're really good. And there certainly isn't a single candidate running who's given a shit about Alaska. So, from my perspective, there isn't much, how do I say this politely, give a fuck. It's just not much give a fuck in the situation for the whole thing.
What if Joe Vogler's not dead, and it's Joe Vogler and Vogler?
He would be like 135. So
yeah, that's possible. You take the right supplements nowadays.
I did hear there's another podcast in the midst who talks about Joe Vogler and Manfred West, but they talk about it from the opposite angle of me. They believe that Manfred West was locked up for killing Joe Vogler in what was actually self-defense, which is a horseshit story put forward by his dog shit attorney. And I want everybody to know I fucking think that story is complete, utter bullshit. But that attorney has gone on, or lawyer has gone on some people's shows and talked about the topic. And what I believe is about to happen is I believe that Manfred West is going to be up in front of the parole board soon. And so he might be getting out of jail. I also believe that Schaefer Cox, who anybody in the libertarian movement, if you give a fuck about Alaska, you might know who this is. Schaefer Cox was a general, in a way, of a militia here in Alaska that became very big. He was in charge of he created a thing called the Liberty Phone Line in Fairbanks, Alaska, which was the first decentralized phone line for policing. These are the things that pisses me off about libertarians, is nobody realizes this stuff, but most of the things they're all doing came from this state, which none of them pay attention to. But a lot of the things that we talk about in the decentralized world, Schaefer Cox either actually did or literally did for the first time. He was charged federally with a conspiracy. They attempted to lock him up and claimed he had orchestrated this thing called Plan 242 or 241, in which he was going to kill a bunch of federal agents in Colorado with the militia.
That's horrible.
They locked him up. The state of Alaska in 2019 heard the case and struck down the sentencing for part
What's
of
his
the thing.
name?
Schaefer Cox. I'll bring up here. We'll watch. This will be what we'll close out the video for. We'll learn about
Yeah,
Schaefer
he's a
Cox
terrible
together.
guy. Terrible. No one should ever do that.
So we'll learn about Schaefer Cox together for the end of this.
Is he still alive?
Yes. So that's where this gets into what I was going to talk about. So
Okay.
if you go on Wikipedia and you bring up Schaefer Cox's Wikipedia bio, and nobody's talked about this currently, I believe I'm the first one on the internet to actually put these two things together. If you go on his Wikipedia, it says that he gets out in 2033, but that isn't actually true, because what happened is in 2019, the state of Alaska reheard parts of his case and they lowered his sentence by 10 years. And so in reality, his release date is actually sometime in October of this year. And so I would love to try to get an interview with him. Unfortunately, I don't think he's going to want to talk. He's probably going to disappear into the woodwork, which I don't blame him of. But yeah, I have the time. I want to give a full shout out here because this guy's an absolute legend. Shout out to James Freeman on YouTube. This is a channel you all should be subscribed to. James has been making content on YouTube for a very long time. I'd love to get him on the channel actually eventually. If I'm sure he does interviews, so he'd be fun to talk to. He's got almost 500,000 subs on YouTube, which is kind of insane now. But I've been watching his random stuff for a while. We'll watch some of this.
Certain rules I live by. My first rule, I don't believe anything the government tells me. Nothing. Zero.
Our Constitution is a remarkable, beautiful gift.
I must say that I know that justice is indivisible. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
A decades-long survey conducted by the Pew Research Center shows that in the early 1960s, 75% of the American population trusted the federal government. The same study shows that today, that number has dwindled to only 20%. The story you're about to hear is a prime example of why.
We're all here for the same reason. It's because we know in our gut that something is horribly wrong.
Meet Schaefer Cox, the liberty-loving, patriotism-preaching political prisoner that you've probably never heard of. Before he caught the attention of the FBI and other federal entities, by all accounts, Schaefer Cox was an upstanding citizen and a pillar of the community. The son of a Baptist minister, Schaefer Cox was raised with conservative Christian values. He enjoyed hunting and fishing and taking advantage of all the outdoor adventure Alaska had to offer. By his early 20s, Schaefer was an accomplished businessman operating his small construction company there in Fairbanks, Alaska, making an honest living. Ever mindful of his civic duty, Schaefer wanted to make a difference. In 2008, he spoke at the Alaska Republican Convention. He had command of the crowd, and the highly respected lieutenant governor spontaneously asked him to run for office from the convention floor, so he did. He came in second place in the Republican primary with 38% of the vote in a three-way race.
People are asking for some direction and for some leadership and for some solutions that they can do because they figured out that voting doesn't work. They've figured out that sending letters to your congressman doesn't work. And they're grasping for...
Hey, Kareem, you there?
I'm here.
How do you answer that? Because I know this is what you're always saying online. So you and this guy would definitely not see eye to eye on this, but I want you to take this story into account when you tell people to go vote.
For some direction and for some leadership and for some solutions that they can do because they've figured out that voting doesn't work. They've figured out that sending letters to your congressman doesn't work. And they're grasping for what's the next option.
He continued to speak at events across Alaska and other states. Schaefer talked a lot about the Constitution and about liberty and freedom. He covered a wide range of topics, including the Federal Reserve, federal overreach, and yes, the Second Amendment.
We're pushing for the, first and foremost, the Alaska Firearms Freedom Act. It's a
You've heard me talk about that a few times on this show. The
Yes, I
Alaska
have.
Firearms Freedom Act was an act where anything that was created in the state of Alaska that was stamped with a stamp that said it was made in the state of Alaska did not have the jurisdiction of the federal government. It's a nullification of federal gun laws in the state for anything that was made in the state, because why the fuck would the feds have any say-so over that?
a declaratory piece of legislation that says a firearm or a firearm accessory or ammunition that's manufactured within the state and stays in the state is none of the federal government's jurisdiction under the Commerce Clause of the Constitution.
He was becoming a fast-rising star in the liberty movement, and although the crowds were getting larger and larger, his message remained the same. The government should obey the Constitution, the document it refers to as the supreme law of the land.
God gave every man the right to life, liberty, and property, a corresponding obligation to defend those rights. We delegate that responsibility, not entirely, but in part, to a government to do what we have a natural right to do, which is to protect them. But they've become a liability to that. It's nobody's job but our own to make sure that the government doesn't become detrimental to the purpose which we created it. We have no obligation to submit to a government that refuses to submit to their governing document.
But Schaefer didn't just talk, he acted. He started groups like the Liberty Bell System.
The Liberty Bell System is an automatic phone system where every freedom lover in Fairbanks can be instantly accessible to the others. Here's how it works. If you are being harmed by anyone who is breaking one of these laws, you can ring the Liberty Bell. Just call the Liberty Bell operator, who will then send a message instantly to thousands of people in Fairbanks who are willing to assist you.
The Second Amendment Task Force.
The way that this got started was several weeks ago. I was doing a radio show and I wasn't even talking about firearms. I was talking about economics. But somebody called the station after the show was over and said, hey, what are we going to do about all these firearms restrictions that just keep coming down the pipe? It's like they just never end. And I said, well, I don't know. Let's get together and talk about it at Denny's on Monday night. And 150 people showed up. And I was expecting maybe 18 or 20. A week later, we only had a week to organize, but we found a place big enough to meet, and we wound up with 700 people.
And the Alaska Peacemakers Militia.
You know what the militia is? The militia is anybody with a gun and a conscience. It's anybody who values their freedom and the freedom of their neighbor. It's somebody who's who's got that sense of duty to their fellow countrymen. It's beautiful and it's right and it's good. And there are 3,500 armed, well-trained men under my command in Fairbanks right now. And they are...
According to FBI agent Richard Sutherland, it was those words that drew the attention of the FBI. Where could Schaefer Cox have gotten the crazy idea that it was okay to create a well-regulated militia? Well, for those of you that don't know, that idea is straight out of the supreme law of the land, the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. It was at that point that the FBI hired career criminal Gerald J.R. Olson to try to get some dirt on Schaefer Cox. Not only did the feds give money to Olson, they also helped him out of some legal trouble he was in for stealing a tractor. Here's a clip of Olson.
Now I want to point out, you explained to me how that is any different than how Manfred West came to be acquainted with Joe Vogler when he was murdered. There's no difference. This is the government MO. This is the FBI and CIA MO. They find a dirty guy who's willing to do more than you, and they get that person to fuck you. Whether it's put you behind bars or kill you is really up to them. And that's sort of what I think people don't understand is this has happened over and over again in Alaska. And so while all these libertarian movements, all these groups and small fringe things are trying to do all this national shit and trying to do all this shit with presidencies or an entire state, they have neglected a place that has a small population that is readily available and accepting to the principles of liberty, and they've allowed them to go unclaimed. They've allowed them to go unprotected. And so that's why I think I've grown recently to be a little more angry at the sort of libertarian ecosystem and how this all works, is because if this is allowed to happen over and over again and nobody steps in, what the fuck is the purpose of having thousands of people across the U.S. who hold on to this ideology? Because if you're not willing to put that ideology where it actually matters, which is a place that had the opportunity on multiple occasions to be free and to have a civilization and a group of people who are living here in freedom, then what the fuck is the point? Like, why do it anyway if you're not going to actually put it to use?
Describing some of his past criminal history in court.
Who are you transporting drugs for on those 2 occasions you talked about?
It was a Hells Angels biker club gang.
By the way, the Hells Angels and biker gangs still have control of a big chunk of the drug market in the state of Alaska. It's a big...
Over a year of investigation, 2 separate U.S. attorneys reviewed the FBI's findings and both came to the same conclusion. Schaefer Cox was not a threat and there should be no legal action. The FBI should have dropped it right then and there, but they didn't. Instead, they decided to try a different tactic: provocation. Knowing full well that Schaefer's young son Seth was loved and well taken care of, the FBI called in a tip to the Office of Children's Services, hoping to incite a shootout, according to witnesses. At the same time, the feds deployed paid informant William Drop Zone Bill Fulton under the direction of FBI Special Agent Sandra Klein to, among other things, goad Cox along and convince him that he needed to take a stand and defend his son from the government at all costs. The plan was to provoke the peacekeeper to violence and set the stage for a shootout.
What the supervising agent had said, quote, "Our plan is to try to take Seth away from Schaefer and Marty, and we believe that will be sufficient to elicit a display of force, at which point we will shoot all 3 of them."
After repeated unsuccessful attempts to convince Schaefer to commit violence, Fulton went from provocation to intimidation. Fulton went as far as threatening Cox's life and admittedly put a knife to the throat of Schaefer's friend Les Zerby during a meeting with Zerby and Cox, and outright demanded, knife in hand, that Cox come up with a plan to murder officials.
And I'm like, "Look, Les, what's your plan?" And he's like, "Well, we don't have a plan." I just lost it. I literally grabbed a knife, started coming over the counter, and I was like, "I'll slit your throat open and finish you out of my TV piece of shit.
Suspecting foul play by the FBI, OCS, and other agencies, and fearing for their lives from Drop Zone Bill Fulton, Schaefer Cox and his wife went to the military police station at Fort Wainwright outside of Fairbanks. Military policeman Stephen Gibson told Schaefer that federal agents had come into the station and bragged about how they were going to, quote, fix the Schaefer Cox problem. And
now, people might ask the question, why would you go to the feds? Why would you go to a military base? Well, that's because the military base in Wainwright, as well as the one in Anchorage, are not just used by the federal government. They're also utilized by the Alaska militia, the state militia, which has existed longer than the federal government has been here. So it would have been to go speak to them, not to who most people would assume.
In light of all this, Schaefer decided the best thing to do would be to leave town. With his wife and kids in tow, Schaefer was headed out of Fairbanks to Canada when FBI informant J.R. Olson stole the battery out of Cox's vehicle. With the vehicle successfully sabotaged, informant Olson tricked Schaefer and his family into taking refuge from informant Bill Fulton in Olson's attic until he could supposedly get his trucker friend to safely transport the Cox family to Canada. Olson kept the Cox family in his attic under false pretenses for 21 days, which met all the legal requirements for kidnapping according to attorney Robert John, and gave the feds plenty of time to plan their strategy. On March 10, 2011, Olson took Schaefer to a deserted industrial lot in Fairbanks where the trucker was supposedly waiting, but instead the FBI ambushed and arrested Schaefer Cox. It's worth mentioning that this case was first tried at the state level where the case was thrown out, but the feds had an axe to grind and he was instantly re-indicted on a federal level. The Justice Department knew it was going to take a very specialized prosecution team to obtain a conviction. Luckily, they knew just who to appoint to Schaefer Cox's case. Meet Joseph Bettini. Bettini first made headlines as a federal prosecutor after his unconstitutional and illegal activity in the case of Senator Ted Stevens. United States District Judge Emmett Sullivan said that in his 25-year career he had never seen mishandling and misconduct like what he had seen by the Justice Department prosecutors who tried Stevens' case. Bettini and his co-conspirator prosecutors were held in contempt for their deceptive and illegal tactics, which included withholding exculpatory evidence, evidence that favored the defense, and allowing false testimony. Judge Sullivan ordered Special Counsel Henry Schulke to investigate Joseph Bettini and the other federal prosecutors in Senator Stevens' case. It was only months before Schaefer's trial started that Special Counsel Schulke testified before Congress about the entire sordid affair of Senator Stevens' prosecution.
The thing that disturbs me so greatly is not that this prosecution involved a United States senator, because I doubt we would be having this hearing if it involved a citizen who was not a United States senator. And that disturbs me greatly. And how do we know? How does any citizen know that the Department of Justice won't abide by similar prosecutorial misconduct in the future?
Senator Stevens, loved and respected by his constituents, had an honorable 40-year-long service as the Republican senator from Alaska until a corrupt faction of the Justice Department unleashed this team of federal prosecutors, Joseph Bettini in particular, who destroyed his name and his career. Even far-left Democrats were able to muster a tiny bit of outrage.
This is some pretty awful conduct by the prosecutors, I think. They're just appalling. One thing I'd like to know, first of all, do you think that what the prosecutors did is, is it illegal?
I think what occurred in this case in a number of instances was in violation of an obligation imposed by the courts. And so, using your term broadly, I would have to say it was illegal.
Unfortunately, the illegal actions of Bettini and his co-workers were enough to secure a guilty verdict only 8 days before the election, and Senator Ted Stevens narrowly lost.
I look only forward, and I still see the day.
By the way, that's what actual election tampering looks like, not changing votes. It looks like just ruining people.
I can remove the cloud that currently surrounds me.
Sadly, Senator Stevens never got the chance to clear his name because he died only months later in a questionable plane crash. The outrage and public scrutiny surrounding the Stevens case still lingered as Schaefer Cox's federal trial got underway less than a year later. Sensing that perhaps Bettini had lost all credibility, the Justice Department named Steve Scrocky as co-prosecutor. Scrocky, equally complicit but perhaps less adept at judicial misconduct, would become the face of the prosecution. Joseph Bettini frequently whispered instructions to Scrocky throughout the entire trial, and as if from a playbook, the same tactics that Judge Sullivan had been so angered by in the Ted Stevens case were employed time and time again in the Schaefer Cox case. Withhold exculpatory evidence, allow false testimony, rinse, and repeat. Out of the hundreds of hours of recorded audio that the paid informants collected, you would think they contained a smoking gun. As it turns out, for some strange reason, the prosecutors asked the judge to make all the tapes inadmissible. They wanted their own surveillance kept secret, all of it except the clips they cherry-picked. Another blatant example of withholding exculpatory evidence. Subsequently released audio recordings and emails between co-prosecutor Steve Scrocky and U.S. Attorney Karen Loeffler, Scrocky's boss, show that Scrocky coached his witnesses to lie, then backed up the lies with his closing arguments. Another blatant example of allowing false testimony. The entire case was built primarily on the testimony of career criminal and conman J.R. Olson, knife-wielding provocateur Bill Fulton, and cherry-picked, out-of-context evidence. It proved successful, and Schaefer Cox was found guilty of conspiracy to kill federal agents. It turns out there's a special place that the DOJ sends people with, in their own words, inspirational significance. It's called the Communications Management Unit, or CMU.
As inspirational significance. I think that's a very benign way of saying that the people are there because of their political beliefs.
Only one journalist, William Potter, has ever been allowed in the CMU.
There are two CMUs. One was opened inside the prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, and the other is inside this prison in Marion, Illinois. Neither of them underwent the formal review process that is required by law when they were opened.
As a result, Potter wound up on an FBI watch list. Fortunately, Schaefer Cox was able to file an appeal with the federal Ninth Circuit Court. The first hearing of the appeal was held just days ago on August 16, 2017 in Anchorage, Alaska. At that time, the judges heard oral arguments and had some interesting questions for the prosecution, represented by Steve Scrocky.
If soliciting someone to kill someone who doesn't exist isn't sufficient, under FIOLA, under whatever, if that is not enough, what other evidence is there of solicitation specifically?
Can you cite me or the panel to any case that have facts analogous to this?
I think if we would have found it, we would have provided it to you, Your Honor.
Exactly. There isn't any such case, is there?
No.
So you're effectively asking us either to make new law or conclude there's not sufficient evidence on this point, right?
Suppose I have a direct intention to kill Mickey Mouse, and I go solicit somebody to kill Mickey Mouse. Well, there's no Mickey Mouse to kill. Can you still have a solicitation?
Explain quite frankly, what they tried to do was charge him with the conspiracy of killing federal officers, but the federal officers didn't exist. Their names were fake. They weren't real people. And they were in a completely different state than where Cox was, so it never made any sense.
Hopefully, this video can help spread the word about.
So after that court did that, they did lower his sentence by 10 years. So from what I have researched, he's supposed to be out this year. So it'd be interesting to see whether or not he makes his way back over here and does something, or what his plans are. But yeah, we'll close out the show there because we've been going.
You think they'll let him out?
Yeah, I do think he'll get out. there's enough people in Alaska who've been raising hell about him, and a lot of the militia guys are still want him out up here. All right. Well, I'll close things out here. And we might do a show tomorrow because I think I'll be. Yes. Absolutely. Go check out James Freeman. That guy makes great content.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if they actually let him out or they do something else because they seem to hold a grudge.
Yeah, especially against that guy. All right, everybody. Have a nice night. Peace.